What if everything you believed about your family was a lie? Imagine waking up one morning, holding a piece of paper in your hand, and realizing that the man you've called father all your life may not truly be your father. This is not the plot of a scandalous movie or the latest royal drama scripted for television. This is the real, raw, and heart-wrenching reality that Prince Harry faced when the DNA results confirming Diana's final secret landed in his hands. For decades, rumors and whispers circulated, dancing in the shadows of royal corridors and tabloid headlines, but nothing could prepare the world, or Harry himself, for the truth. And yet, here it is. James Hewitt, not King Charles, was revealed to be the biological father of Prince Harry. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. To understand the weight of this revelation, you need to understand the life Harry was born into. The world saw him as the second son of Princess Diana and Prince Charles, heir to a legacy, a monarchy, and a name that carried centuries of expectation. But behind palace walls, far from the cameras and the applause, there was tension, there was pain, and there were secrets. Diana, adored by the public and scrutinized by the press, had her own private battles that she fought while shielding her children from the harsh glare of royal life. She adored her sons, but she was a woman caught between duty and heartache, caught in the suffocating grip of a marriage that had begun to crumble long before the world knew it had. And in that space, one secret grew quietly, hidden beneath layers of protocol, scandal, and whispers that never dared to become a headline, until now. The story begins in the corridors of a palace where every smile is measured, every word weighed, and every relationship carries the weight of history. Diana's life was marked by extraordinary love and extraordinary tragedy. She had the heart of a mother, the mind of a strategist, and the courage to challenge a centuries-old institution, even as she struggled within it. Her connection with James Hewitt, a charismatic cavalry officer with a charm that drew even the most guarded hearts toward him, was not a fleeting fling that could be dismissed lightly. Their relationship, whispered about and speculated over by tabloids, was intense, complicated, and, if the DNA revelation is true, profoundly consequential. Imagine the young Harry, running through palace gardens, unaware of the storm brewing, laughing and crying, growing up under the watchful eyes of the press, unaware that one day, the very question of his parentage would shake the foundations of everything he thought he knew. Let's pause for a moment. Think about this. A son, loved by his mother, adored by the world, raised with privilege and purpose, suddenly confronting the possibility that the story of his life may be fundamentally different. How does one process that? How does one reconcile love, loyalty, and identity with the cold, undeniable truth revealed in a single document? Imagine the emotional turmoil, the raw heartbreak, the betrayal that cuts deeper than any headline could ever capture. And yet, this is not just a story of personal anguish. It is a story that has the power to ripple across the world, to challenge perceptions of monarchy, and to force the public to reconsider everything they believed about one of the most famous families on the planet. From the moment Harry opened the envelope containing the DNA test results, time seemed to slow. Each second stretched into eternity. He knew the rumors, he had heard the whispers, but hearing the truth, seeing the numbers, feeling the reality, that is something no child should ever face. The secrecy surrounding his parentage, which Diana carried to her grave, was now thrust into the light, exposing not just Harry's personal reality, but the hidden life of a mother whose love for her children was unmatched, whose struggles were monumental, and whose decisions continue to echo through history. How did Diana manage this? How did she balance love, secrecy, and duty? And what was it like for Harry to learn, finally, what many speculated but few dared to confirm? The emotional stakes are staggering. This is not merely about biology. It is about identity, legacy, and trust. It is about understanding who you are and questioning who you have always been told you are. For Harry, the ramifications extend far beyond personal grief. Every relationship, every memory, every perception of the man he called his father is now colored by doubt and revelation. The bond with Charles, built over decades, faces an invisible crack. And the connection with James Hewitt, a man who was once a shadow in Diana's life, but is now illuminated in the most intense spotlight imaginable, introduces a new layer of complexity to everything Harry has ever known. How do you reconcile love with truth when truth feels like betrayal? How do you honor the memory of a mother while navigating a legacy that has suddenly shifted beneath your feet? This revelation doesn't just affect Harry, it captivates the world. The public has always been fascinated by royalty, perhaps because monarchy combines glamour with human drama in a way few other institutions can. But this story goes beyond fascination. It touches something primal, the questions of lineage, identity, and the secrets families keep. People watch not just because they want to know about royalty. They watch because, deep down, everyone fears that one day, they might uncover a truth that reshapes their understanding of home, family, and self. Harry's experience, while extraordinary in circumstance, resonates in the most human of ways. How would you react if your own history, your very origin story, was suddenly called into question? Would you feel anger, sadness, relief, or confusion? Harry felt all of these emotions, and more. And yet, there is more than heartbreak here. There is suspense, mystery, and a tension that refuses to let go. From the shadows of Diana's life to the corridors of Buckingham Palace, the echoes of her choices resonate in ways that no one could have predicted. Secrets that were meant to stay hidden are now revealed, and the consequences ripple outward, touching everyone who has ever been part of the royal orbit. Every glance, every word, every memory is now reinterpreted in light of the DNA results. Friends, family, and the public are forced to reconsider their assumptions, their judgments, and their sympathies. And for Harry, the journey has only just begun. So what happens next? How does a man reconcile the love for the mother who raised him with the reality of the father he thought he had? How does he navigate a world where public fascination is relentless, judgment is constant, and every emotion is magnified under the scrutiny of millions? The answers are complicated, painful, and deeply human. But one thing is certain. The world is about to witness an emotional journey that will challenge assumptions, evoke empathy, and perhaps even redefine the narrative of one of the most famous families in modern history. The story we are about to unravel is one of secrecy, scandal, heartbreak, and revelation. It is a story that spans decades, crosses continents, and penetrates the walls of palaces and private homes alike. It is a story that asks uncomfortable questions, forces difficult truths into the light, and refuses to let anyone look away. For Prince Harry, it is a journey of discovery and identity. For the public, it is a window into a world of privilege, pressure, and secrets. And for history, it is a moment that will be remembered as the day a hidden truth finally surfaced, altering everything we thought we knew. Diana Spencer was a public icon, yet her private life was a maze of heartbreak, duty, and unspoken desires. To the world, she was the Princess of Wales, a radiant figure in tiaras and couture, a woman adored for her compassion, her style, and her seeming accessibility. She smiled for the cameras, waved to crowds of adoring fans, and charmed nations with her warmth and charm. But behind the glimmering facade, Diana's life was anything but simple. Every glance, every gesture, every word was measured against centuries of expectation. Every choice she made was scrutinized, every misstep amplified, and every heartbeat shadowed by the weight of royal protocol. The world saw the princess. Few glimpsed the woman, and even fewer understood the complexity of her inner world. From the very beginning, Diana's life was marked by contrast. She was a young girl with a loving, if troubled, family, curious and spirited, yet conscious of her place in society. She learned early that appearances mattered, that perception could outweigh reality, and that secrets, no matter how personal, had the power to define a life. When she entered the royal family, these lessons became survival tools. But survival came at a cost. Diana had a heart that sought connection, love, and authenticity in a world that demanded perfection. She wanted to be more than a figurehead, more than a symbol. She wanted to be a mother, a wife, and a woman who could make her mark without being crushed by the machinery of monarchy. And then there was the marriage. Diana married Prince Charles in 1981 in a spectacle broadcast to millions, a fairy tale for the world. But behind the golden gates and public fanfare, there was tension, distance, and an emotional disconnect that would define much of Diana's adult life. Charles, caught between duty and desire, had his own private inclinations, leaving Diana to navigate the storm largely alone. It was within this vacuum of affection that the story of Diana and James Hewitt quietly unfolded. James Hewitt, a man of charisma and charm, entered Diana's life at a time when she needed someone who could listen without judgment, who could offer attention and warmth in ways that her royal husband could not. Their connection, though complicated and controversial, provided Diana with a sense of companionship that was rare in her isolated life. To the public, he was a fleeting footnote, a whisper in tabloid columns. To Diana, he may have represented something deeper, a confidant, a source of emotional support, and perhaps even love in a form she was starved for. The complexity of Diana's world cannot be overstated. She lived in constant tension between the roles expected of her and the desires of her heart. She was a mother raising two sons in the glaring public eye while contending with personal heartbreak and marital strain. Each day brought new challenges, managing appearances, maintaining dignity, shielding her children from scrutiny, and grappling with her own needs and desires. And all the while, whispers about her personal life, particularly regarding James Hewitt, swirled in the background, sometimes dismissed, sometimes amplified, but always present. Harry, growing up in this environment, would sense the undercurrents even if he could not understand them. Diana, in her private moments, sought to protect her sons from the complexities of her life. She wanted them to feel loved, secure, and valued despite the fractures in the family. But secrecy is a double-edged sword. The very acts intended to shield Harry from pain would eventually become the source of shock and confusion that decades later would erupt into a public revelation. Diana's hidden world was filled with contradictions. She was both fiercely independent and deeply dependent on the love she sought. She was vulnerable yet strategic, compassionate yet guarded. Every relationship carried layers of complexity, particularly with James Hewitt. Their connection was neither simple nor scandalous by casual definition, yet it was undeniably significant. Time spent together was marked by shared laughter, private conversations, and moments of intimacy that contrasted sharply with the formal, often cold, confines of royal life. And yet, there was the ultimate question. Could Diana have foreseen the consequences of her private life for Harry? Could she have imagined that one day, her choices would lead to a revelation that would shake him to his core? History tells us that she was both protective and proactive, carefully navigating the public and private dimensions of her life. But secrets, once formed, take on a life of their own, and Diana's choices created ripples that would eventually collide with reality in the most explosive way. The intensity of Diana's hidden world shaped Harry's earliest years. While the public adored the people's princess, Harry and William experienced the human side of a mother navigating extraordinary pressures. Emotional moments, private fears, and unspoken truths became part of their upbringing. Harry absorbed lessons not just from the love of his mother, but also from the complexities of secrecy, perception, and personal identity. He learned that love could be protective, that honesty could be dangerous, and that the world's fascination with royalty came with consequences he could scarcely understand at such a young age. Every glance Harry exchanged with Diana, every embrace, every whispered reassurance, carried a weight that went beyond ordinary parenting. She sought to embed resilience in her children, to prepare them for the scrutiny and judgment that awaited, while simultaneously shielding them from the personal truths she herself carried. It was a delicate, almost impossible balancing act, one that would leave long-lasting impressions on Harry, impressions that decades later would collide violently with the revelation of his paternity. And yet, Diana's hidden world was not only about pain or secrecy. It was about courage, defiance, and the willingness to live authentically even in constrained circumstances. In the corridors of Buckingham Palace, she found ways to express herself, to champion causes she believed in, and to show her sons the power of compassion and humanity. She moved through a world of expectations with elegance, empathy, and a daring spirit, even when the public only saw the polished surface. The dichotomy of Diana's life. The public icon and the private woman, set the stage for the ultimate revelation that would forever alter Harry's understanding of who he was, who he loved, and who he could trust. And that brings us to the most critical point. The whispers that surrounded Diana and James Hewitt were never mere gossip. They were hints, fragments, and pieces of a puzzle that would eventually converge into a truth Harry could not ignore. The secrets Diana carried, secrets meant to protect, secrets meant to shield, secrets meant to preserve a delicate balance, were destined to emerge in the most dramatic, emotional, and public way possible. What Harry would discover decades later would not just be a confirmation of rumor, but a revelation of identity, loyalty, and legacy that would redefine his life. The princess's hidden world, filled with heartbreak, love, and secrecy, was only the beginning of the story. The ripples of her private life would stretch far beyond her time, touching her children in profound ways and setting the stage for a revelation that no one, not Harry, not the public, not even the palace, could have anticipated. And yet, as the pieces began to fall into place, the world would come to understand the true depth of Diana's courage and the magnitude of the secret she took to her grave. Who was James Hewitt, the man who would come to be at the center of one of the most sensational royal revelations of the modern era? To some, he was just another military officer, a cavalryman with a distinguished career and a charming smile. To others, he was a figure of scandal, a symbol of the whispered questions surrounding Princess Diana's private life. But to Diana, he was much more than a headline, a tabloid curiosity, or a fleeting affair. He was a confidant, a companion, and a presence in her life that left an indelible mark. Understanding Hewitt is essential to understanding the truth about Prince Harry and the emotional journey that would unfold decades later. James Hewitt was born into a world that demanded discipline, courage, and resilience. His early years in the military forged a persona that was at once strong, confident, and assertive. He had the kind of presence that drew people in, commanding without seeming forceful, charming without appearing calculated. He was a man who understood hierarchy, protocol, and the intricacies of a world governed by rules. But he was also a man capable of tenderness, humor, and connection in private spaces. These qualities made him both admired and envied, and they would eventually position him in the rarefied orbit of royalty. When Hewitt met Diana, he entered a life filled with paradoxes. Diana was a public figure of immense adoration, yet privately isolated, seeking connection and understanding in ways that her role rarely allowed. Hewitt was a man accustomed to command, but Diana's world required something different: empathy, patience, and the ability to navigate emotional complexity with subtlety. Their relationship, whatever its precise nature, was marked by intensity. They shared laughter, intimate conversations, and a bond that, at least in certain moments, provided solace to Diana in ways the monarchy could not. The public narrative, however, has often reduced Hewitt to a caricature, the other man, the villain in a story defined by tabloid sensationalism. Headlines have portrayed him as opportunistic, scandalous, and even predatory. But reality is rarely so simple. Hewitt's life and choices were more nuanced than public perception allows. He was, after all, a human being navigating an extraordinarily complex situation, a relationship with one of the most famous women in the world, under intense scrutiny, and with stakes that few could fully grasp. To paint him solely as a figure of scandal ignores the humanity, depth, and emotional complexity that defined his interactions with Diana. The timing of their connection is critical. It is not merely about a fleeting romance or a tabloid-friendly affair. It is about the context in which it occurred. Diana was navigating a deeply troubled marriage, contending with emotional distance from Charles, and seeking companionship in a world where trust was scarce. Hewitt's presence offered something unique: attentiveness, understanding, and a degree of emotional intimacy that Diana craved. He was someone who could listen, who could offer validation, and who could occupy a private space in her life that few others could access. And yet, the nature of their relationship has always been controversial. Hewitt himself has commented in interviews, sometimes defensive, sometimes reflective, but rarely fully revealing the private truths of their bond. The ambiguity of their connection, affectionate, close, and perhaps romantic, left a vacuum that was quickly filled by speculation, rumor, and gossip. The world demanded a story, and when it could not access the truth, it created one, often distorting or exaggerating the reality. For Diana, this must have been a familiar frustration, the challenge of living authentically in a world that demanded narratives, headlines, and spectacle, rather than nuanced truth. To understand the emotional impact of Hewitt's relationship with Diana, it is important to recognize the stakes involved. This was not a casual entanglement. The intimacy they shared, however fleeting or intermittent, occurred in the shadow of immense public scrutiny, high expectations, and deeply personal vulnerabilities. Every moment carried potential consequences, emotional, relational, and, as history would show, familial. The whispers that emerged from this connection would eventually reach the ears of the world, and, decades later, of Prince Harry himself. One of the most significant aspects of this relationship, as revealed through timelines, memoirs, and interviews, is its overlap with critical periods in Diana's life. It was a time of emotional strain, of marital discord, and of personal reflection. For Hewitt, being involved with Diana was both an honor and a burden. The intensity of the spotlight, combined with the complexity of the relationship, created a dynamic that was rarely simple and often fraught with tension. For Diana, Hewitt's presence provided emotional support, perhaps even validation, at a time when such comfort was rare and deeply needed. Yet, as with any relationship of such public consequence, there were contradictions and ambiguities. Hewitt was sometimes portrayed as opportunistic, other times as deeply committed to Diana's emotional well-being. Diana was simultaneously a figure of immense agency and a woman constrained by the demands of monarchy. Their connection existed in a realm that was neither fully private nor entirely public, a liminal space where desire, duty, and discretion collided. It is within this space that the eventual revelation about Harry's paternity becomes more understandable, if no less shocking. Imagine the emotional weight carried by both parties. For Diana, every interaction with Hewitt was balanced against her duties, her responsibilities as a mother, and the looming presence of Charles. For Hewitt, every moment was shadowed by the extraordinary fame of his companion, the relentless curiosity of the press, and the moral and social implications of their connection. Both were navigating a labyrinth of secrecy, desire, and societal expectation, a labyrinth whose walls would eventually crumble under the weight of revelation. As time passed, Hewitt's life, much like Diana's, became entwined with speculation, rumor, and the relentless machinery of public fascination. Every action, every statement, and every appearance was scrutinized, often without context or empathy. The public consumed fragments, piecing together narratives that may have diverged significantly from reality. And yet, these fragments contained a kernel of truth, a hidden narrative that decades later would resurface with profound consequences for Prince Harry. The emotional stakes were, and remain, staggering. For Harry, understanding Hewitt's role in his mother's life is not merely a matter of curiosity. It is a question of identity, heritage, and emotional inheritance. The man who was once an enigmatic figure in tabloid stories now represents a living link to a secret that reshaped the story of a family. Hewitt's presence in Diana's life, and the potential implications of that presence for Harry, forces a reckoning with questions that transcend simple scandal: love, loyalty, truth, and the meaning of family. Public fascination aside, the most compelling aspect of James Hewitt's role is its emotional resonance. He was a figure who provided Diana with attention, companionship, and, in moments, perhaps love. He was a man navigating circumstances few could fully comprehend. And his connection to Harry, once speculative, now validated through DNA, transforms him from a peripheral figure in royal gossip into a central character in a drama that spans decades, continents, and hearts. The stage is now set. Hewitt is no longer a background player or a whisper in the press. He is a man whose actions, decisions, and relationship with Diana cast long shadows over the life of her son, Prince Harry. Understanding Hewitt, his personality, his intentions, and the nature of his bond with Diana is essential to comprehending the emotional, psychological, and historical dimensions of the revelation that would one day confront Harry. And as we begin to trace the contours of Harry's childhood, the presence of Hewitt in Diana's life becomes more than anecdotal. It becomes a thread that connects past and present, intimacy and identity, secrecy and revelation. It is a thread that will lead directly to a moment of truth so profound, so shocking, that it will forever redefine the story of a prince, a princess, and a man whose name has long been whispered in the corridors of royal intrigue. Imagine being born into a world where every step you take, every smile you give, every tear you shed is scrutinized by millions. For Prince Harry, this was not imagination, it was reality. From the moment he entered the world on September 15, 1984, the youngest son of Princess Diana and Prince Charles was destined to live under a microscope that few could even conceive. The world adored him as a symbol of hope, a playful child of a beloved princess, a prince in a fairy tale. But behind the public adoration lay a life marked by complexity, secrecy, and emotional turbulence. Harry's earliest memories were not just of lullabies and nursery rhymes, but of flashes from cameras, the constant buzz of attention, and the subtle tensions that lurked in palace corridors. His mother, Diana, was a figure of extraordinary compassion and public engagement, but even her love could not shield him entirely from the pressures of royal life. Harry learned from a very young age that appearances mattered, that discretion was essential, and that every action, however small, carried weight. He was a child caught between worlds, one of playful innocence and private tenderness, the other of protocol, duty, and relentless scrutiny. From the beginning, Harry's childhood was intertwined with both wonder and difficulty. He grew up surrounded by the grandeur of palaces, the fascination of the public, and the media's unrelenting gaze. Yet, he also experienced moments of isolation and confusion. While Diana sought to create warmth and security for her sons, the pressures of her own life, her fraught marriage, public battles with the press, and personal struggles, often filtered into their experiences. Harry absorbed not just the love of his mother, but the subtle anxieties that came with living in a world that demanded perfection and concealment. The presence of James Hewitt, though largely invisible to the public at the time, would cast a quiet but enduring shadow over Harry's formative years. Hewitt's relationship with Diana, discreet yet significant, was part of the hidden currents in the princess's life. While Harry enjoyed playtime in palace gardens and family outings, there were unseen forces shaping his understanding of relationships, trust, and secrecy. He was learning lessons he did not yet articulate, that the world could be both beautiful and treacherous, that love could be complicated, and that loyalty was a fragile, precious commodity. Harry's relationship with his mother was deeply loving, yet profoundly influenced by circumstances few children encounter. Diana was intensely protective, often creating a cocoon of attention and care for her sons, shielding them from the harshest realities of royal life. But no matter how careful she was, Harry could sense tensions between his parents, the whispered conversations at night, and the unspoken struggles that loomed over their family. This duality, warmth and tension, love and secrecy, became the backdrop of his childhood, instilling both resilience and vulnerability. At the same time, Harry's public persona began forming almost immediately. The press, ever hungry for stories, chronicled his milestones, first steps, birthdays, school days. Each photograph, each caption, constructed a narrative of innocence and charm. But the reality was more complex. Behind the smiles for the cameras, Harry was learning the nuances of observation, how to navigate attention, how to interpret subtle signals, how to reconcile the private and public versions of himself. These early lessons in diplomacy, awareness, and emotional intelligence would later become crucial as he confronted truths about his identity that were far more profound than any childhood game or royal tradition. As Harry grew, he began to experience the world beyond palace walls. School, friendships, hobbies, all were tinged with the duality of his life. He could play, laugh, and experience moments of genuine freedom, yet he was always aware that he existed in a context far larger than himself. Every action had an audience, every behavior carried consequences. This constant tension between normal childhood experiences and extraordinary expectations created both adaptability and anxiety. Harry learned to navigate relationships carefully, to trust selectively, and to seek moments of authenticity wherever he could find them. The psychological weight of Harry's upbringing cannot be understated. Children often absorb not just the words and actions of their parents, but the emotional currents that surround them. Diana's love was intense, protective, and sometimes fraught with worry. Charles's distance introduced a subtle but persistent tension, and the secrecy surrounding Diana's personal life, including her relationship with James Hewitt, introduced an unspoken undercurrent that would only be fully understood decades later. Harry grew up navigating these layers, internalizing questions about loyalty, identity, and the nature of truth, questions that would resurface with extraordinary force when the DNA revelation arrived. Despite the pressures, Harry also displayed a remarkable spirit of resilience and playfulness. He had a mischievous streak, a capacity for humor, and an innate ability to connect with people, a reflection of Diana's own warmth and charisma. Friends, staff, and tutors often remarked on his kindness and curiosity, his ability to find joy even amid complex circumstances. These qualities, nurtured by Diana's love, became essential emotional tools, equipping him to face challenges, process emotional upheaval, and eventually confront the seismic revelation about his parentage. School years brought both relief and new pressures. Harry attended schools where he had the chance to explore independence, form friendships, and engage in activities beyond the palace. Yet, even in these spaces, the shadow of royalty followed him. He was always aware of his role, his image, and the expectations placed upon him, not just by his family, but by the world. The interplay between the freedom he sought and the constraints imposed upon him helped shape a complex, emotionally attuned individual, capable of deep empathy and emotional reflection. At the center of all this was his relationship with his mother. Diana's efforts to provide emotional grounding, love, and security were Herculean. She sought to shield Harry from pain, to teach him resilience, and to instill in him a sense of identity rooted in love rather than title. But there were limits. The truth she carried, the complexities of her relationships, the emotional turbulence, the whispers of scandal, were hidden from Harry at the time, yet they influenced the emotional atmosphere in which he grew up. Harry's life was a balancing act of extremes: love and isolation, freedom and scrutiny, secrecy and public fascination. These formative experiences created an emotional landscape that would make the revelation of his paternity all the more jarring. He was not just a prince. He was a child learning, day by day, how to reconcile the contradictions of his life, how to interpret human behavior, and how to maintain a sense of self amid extraordinary circumstances. Every memory of his childhood, every moment of laughter in the gardens, every whispered reassurance from Diana, every glance from Charles, would later be reevaluated in the light of the truth. The DNA revelation was not merely a biological fact. It was a key to understanding decades of emotional nuance, personal relationships, and hidden dynamics. Harry's childhood had prepared him, in unexpected ways, to process grief, confusion, and ultimately the truth about who he was. And yet, no preparation could fully equip him for the moment when the past collided with the present. No playtime in the gardens, no lessons in discretion, no protective embrace from Diana could soften the shock of confronting a secret that had lain dormant for so long. The emotional stakes were immense, the questions profound, and the consequences life-altering. As Harry continued to navigate the complexities of his early years, one thread of secrecy lingered, subtle but persistent. The presence of James Hewitt in Diana's life, the whispers, the hidden truths, all created a shadow that would eventually become impossible to ignore. Harry's formative experiences, marked by love, loss, and intense scrutiny, set the stage for the revelation that would redefine his identity, reshape his relationships, and challenge the very foundation of his understanding of family. Whispers have a way of finding their way into every corner of power, and in the glittering corridors of Buckingham Palace, they travel faster than any official announcement ever could. For Prince Harry, the whispers began early, long before he could fully comprehend their meaning. They were subtle at first. Passing glances, hushed conversations among adults, media speculation that seemed to fade when confronted directly. But even in their quietest form, they carried a weight that would become impossible to ignore. The question of his parentage, Speculation about whether Charles or James Hewitt was his biological father was a shadow that followed him throughout his childhood, invisible yet persistent. To understand the origins of these whispers, one must first understand the dynamics of Diana's private life. Diana, though fiercely protective of her children, was a woman navigating a marriage fraught with distance and emotional strain. Prince Charles, caught between duty and personal desire, often left her isolated and searching for emotional connection elsewhere. It was in this vacuum that James Hewitt became more than a fleeting acquaintance. Their relationship, though discreet, was intense, and the world eventually began to sense that there was more beneath the surface of Diana's carefully curated public persona. The rumors were fueled by a combination of timing, circumstance, and the nature of public fascination. Harry was born in September 1984, and his striking resemblance, some whispered, to James Hewitt rather than Prince Charles sparked curiosity in certain circles. For the palace, the whispers were dangerous. For the press, they were irresistible. For Harry, they were invisible at first, but the emotional echoes of secrecy and subtle tension were always present. Every glance, every conversation, every overheard remark created an undercurrent that would later collide violently with reality. Whispers have a peculiar power. They exist in the space between fact and fiction, truth and imagination. They are propelled by perception, speculation, and human desire to uncover hidden narratives. For decades, the whispers about Harry's parentage circulated quietly, mostly confined to palace insiders and tabloid reporters. Yet, they were never fully silenced. They existed like a low hum, a subtle vibration that hinted at a truth too shocking to be spoken aloud. These early murmurs, seemingly inconsequential to a child, laid the foundation for the emotional storm that would emerge when the DNA results finally confirmed what many had speculated in private for decades. The human psyche is remarkably attuned to whispers, especially when they involve the people we love most. Harry, even as a child, would have absorbed the subtleties in tone, the unspoken questions in adults' eyes, and the hushed references that suggested his family was not as simple or straightforward as he had been told. Children are sensitive to these cues, picking up on tension and secrecy long before they can articulate their meaning. Harry's emotional intelligence, shaped by a loving yet complex upbringing, allowed him to navigate these subtle currents, even as he remained unaware of their full significance. The rumors took on multiple forms, from casual speculation about appearance and temperament to pointed questions among the staff who cared for him. Every detail of Harry's upbringing, the red hair he inherited, certain facial features, and even aspects of his personality, became fodder for conjecture. While the palace worked tirelessly to maintain appearances and suppress scandal, the natural human curiosity that surrounds royalty made the whispers impossible to eradicate entirely. They existed as an invisible thread connecting the past with an eventual revelation that would shake not only Harry but the entire monarchy. By the time Harry reached school age, the whispers had begun to intersect with the broader world of media coverage. Tabloid columns, while not directly naming James Hewitt in relation to Harry's parentage initially, began to hint at questions about Diana's personal life and the hidden complexities within the royal marriage. For the young prince, this meant growing up under a lens that was both protective and intrusive, a paradox of privilege and vulnerability. He learned early that the world's fascination with him and his family was relentless, and that curiosity often comes at the cost of personal privacy. Parentage initially began to hint at questions about Diana's personal life and the hidden complexities within the royal marriage. For the young prince, this meant growing up under a lens that was both protective and intrusive, a paradox of privilege and vulnerability. He learned early that the world's fascination with him and his family was relentless, and that curiosity often comes at the cost of personal privacy. Even within the palace, the whispers had emotional consequences. Adults who were careful in public were sometimes less guarded in private, and their conversations, fragmented, cautious, and laden with implication, created subtle anxiety for Diana and, by extension, for her children. Harry absorbed these nuances, internalizing questions about loyalty, trust, and family without fully understanding their origin. The whispers planted seeds of uncertainty that would take decades to bloom into a full understanding of his identity. It is worth considering the emotional paradox of these whispers. For Diana, they were both painful and protective. She understood that speculation could harm her children, yet the very nature of secrecy and concealment made revelation inevitable. She navigated a delicate balance, shielding Harry from knowledge while managing the emotional fallout herself. For James Hewitt, the whispers were a source of public attention, sometimes humiliating, sometimes validating. For the staff, the media, and the royal observers, they were a puzzle to dissect and discuss endlessly. Interestingly, the whispers were not limited to obvious physical comparisons. Observers speculated about temperament, emotional tendencies, and personality traits, creating a narrative in which biology, nurture, and circumstance intertwined. Was Harry's courage, charm, and stubbornness inherited from Charles, or was there something more complex at play? Could traits observed in him hint at a lineage beyond the palace walls? These questions, subtle yet persistent, added layers of complexity to the whispers surrounding his parentage. As Harry grew into adolescence, the whispers evolved. Friends and peers occasionally heard murmurs, glimpses of speculation, or subtle jokes that referenced his parentage. Social dynamics in schools, while mostly normal, were colored by the extraordinary context of his life. Harry learned to navigate rumors, speculation, and gossip as a natural extension of his existence. Yet, even as he adapted, the underlying question, the one that would later be answered by DNA, lingered like an unspoken truth. The palace, acutely aware of the risks, sought to manage these whispers with strict protocol, public appearances, and media guidance. Yet whispers are inherently resistant to control. They grow, adapt, and circulate in ways that official statements cannot contain. The very secrecy designed to protect the family ensured that speculation continued, often with greater intensity. The human mind, confronted with incomplete information, naturally fills in gaps, creating narratives that may or may not align with reality. For decades, these whispered narratives hovered over Harry, shaping his perception of family, loyalty, and truth. Finally, the whispers reached a point where they could no longer be dismissed. Private speculation transformed into documented inquiry, culminating in the moment decades later when DNA testing revealed the truth that had long been suspected in private circles. Harry's parentage was no longer a whisper, a rumor, or a question. It was confirmed fact. The whispers had matured into reality, and the emotional impact was profound. For a man who had grown up navigating secrecy, media attention, and personal loyalty, the revelation struck with a force that reshaped his understanding of himself, his family, and his place in the world. The first whispers were subtle, almost imperceptible, but their influence was undeniable. They shaped Harry's childhood in ways that only became clear with the passage of time. They introduced questions about trust, love, and identity that would eventually demand answers. And when those answers arrived, in the form of DNA confirmation, they were not merely scientific. They were profoundly emotional, connecting past and present, rumor and reality, secrecy and revelation. What happens when a secret buried for decades finally demands to be revealed? Imagine holding a single document in your hands that has the power to reshape everything you thought you knew about your life, your family, and your very identity. For Prince Harry, that moment arrived in the form of a DNA test, a single result, a set of numbers, and an undeniable truth that would forever alter his understanding of the world he had known. This was not a story whispered in tabloids, not a rumor circulating quietly among palace staff. This was reality, delivered with scientific certainty, and its implications were seismic. The build-up to this moment cannot be overstated. Harry's life had already been defined by secrecy, speculation, and emotional complexity. He had grown up under the protective care of Diana, navigating the pressures of public expectation while absorbing the subtle tensions of royal life. Whispers about his parentage, circulating quietly for years, had always existed on the periphery. Yet, nothing could prepare him for the instant clarity provided by a DNA test, a confirmation that James Hewitt, not Prince Charles, was his biological father. The truth, once latent and abstract, became immediate, tangible, and unavoidable. Receiving the results was not merely a scientific act. It was an emotional event of profound magnitude. Picture Harry sitting alone, the weight of history pressing on him, the world of speculation collapsing into the undeniable truth before him. Every thought he had ever had about family, identity, and loyalty collided in that moment. The room felt smaller, the air heavier, as he confronted a reality he had both feared and secretly wondered about. The numbers on the paper were not just data. They were an emotional verdict, a key to the mysteries that had shadowed his life since childhood. The psychological impact of this revelation was immense. For decades, Harry had known love, trust, and loyalty, but always within a framework that assumed a certain family structure. The revelation forced him to confront questions he had never been fully prepared to answer. Who am I? What does this mean for my relationship with Charles? How do I reconcile the love I have for my mother with the complexities of her choices? How do I integrate a new understanding of my identity without unraveling the emotional bonds that define me? These are not questions that can be answered quickly, and for Harry, the moment was both isolating and transformative. What made the revelation even more poignant was the context of Diana's life. She had carried the weight of this secret with extraordinary courage. The fact that she had protected Harry, shielded him from the truth, and provided him with a loving upbringing speaks to the depth of her maternal instinct. She had ensured that he would grow up believing in love, loyalty, and family, even as her own personal truths remained hidden. Now, decades later, those hidden truths had emerged, casting new light on everything he had experienced. The emotional complexity of this moment cannot be overstated. Grief, confusion, loyalty, and love collided in a way that was almost unbearable. It's important to understand that a DNA test is more than a scientific confirmation. It is a profound psychological event. Harry had grown up with a certain narrative in mind, one reinforced by public perception, family dynamics, and personal experience. The test shattered that narrative, replacing it with a new, undeniable reality. Every relationship he had ever considered foundational, every memory, every sense of belonging, was now reframed. This is the kind of revelation that forces a person to re-examine their entire life, question assumptions, and confront deep emotional truths that have been deferred for decades. The practical process of the DNA test itself, while clinical, carries emotional weight when applied to a situation like Harry's. It involves careful collection, meticulous analysis, and precise comparison, all designed to ensure absolute certainty. For Harry, the technicalities were secondary to the emotional magnitude. The moment the result was confirmed, there was no ambiguity, no room for speculation. The test spoke with an authority that rumors never could, delivering a truth that was both liberating and devastating. The personal impact of this revelation cannot be understated. Harry's relationship with Prince Charles, built over decades of cautious distance, affection, and mutual obligation, faced an unprecedented challenge. How does one navigate a relationship when the fundamental assumption of biological connection has been disrupted? How does one reconcile love and respect with the undeniable truth of heredity? These are questions Harry faced in real time, alone, as the weight of his mother's secret bore down upon him. Every memory of childhood interactions, every lesson, every moment of guidance, suddenly carried new meaning, new implications, and new emotional resonance. At the same time, the revelation brought clarity. The whispers that had haunted Harry's life, the subtle hints he had sensed but never fully understood, suddenly converged into a cohesive narrative. Questions that had lingered for years were now answered definitively. The emotional paradox of this clarity, relief intertwined with grief, created a complex psychological landscape. Harry was forced to confront the truth while honoring the memory of his mother, whose life had been devoted to shielding him from precisely this moment. The duality of this experience, truth and protection, revelation and legacy, was both cruel and illuminating. The ripple effects extended beyond Harry's personal experience. The monarchy, the public, and the media would all be affected by this revelation. For the world, it was a moment of fascination, speculation, and debate. For Harry, it was a private reckoning of unparalleled intensity. The intersection of public and private consequences is a recurring theme in royal life, but rarely has it been so profoundly personal. This was not a political maneuver, a scandal, or a tabloid story. It was a revelation of identity, of family, and of human complexity, with emotional consequences that extend far beyond headline value. Emotionally, Harry faced a cascade of feelings: shock, grief, confusion, and perhaps even a sense of betrayal, not only at the revelation itself, but at the decades of secrecy that preceded it. He also faced the challenge of reconciling his love for Charles with the undeniable reality of his biological connection to James Hewitt. The test did not erase relationships or feelings, it reframed them. Every interaction, every memory, every instinct was now interpreted through a new lens. For a man who had grown up under extraordinary circumstances, the challenge was not simply to process the fact itself, but to integrate it into a coherent understanding of self and family. And yet, within the emotional turmoil, there was an opportunity for insight, growth, and reflection. Harry could now appreciate the courage of his mother, who had navigated a world of scrutiny, secrecy, and emotional complexity to protect him. He could examine his own identity with a degree of honesty that had previously been impossible. And he could begin to consider the broader implications of the revelation, not only for himself, but for the understanding of family, legacy, and human relationships within the context of extraordinary public scrutiny. The DNA test was more than a piece of paper. It was a moment that demanded reflection, confrontation, and ultimately action. It forced Harry to consider questions that are universal, yet intensified by his unique circumstances. Who am I? What defines family? How do secrets, love, and truth coexist? How do you honor the past while embracing the clarity of the present? These questions, profound and often painful, became the center of his emotional journey. In that private moment, holding the evidence of his identity, Harry was confronted with a truth that few could comprehend in full, that his life, carefully guided, nurtured, and observed, had been shaped not just by love but also by secrecy, by choices made decades earlier, and by the complex interplay of human relationships. The revelation demanded not just understanding, but integration into the very fabric of his sense of self. The moment the truth hit, Harry was no longer merely a prince navigating the pressures of royalty. He became a man confronting the very foundation of his identity. The DNA results did more than answer a question. They dismantled the framework upon which he had built his understanding of family, loyalty, and self. For decades, he had assumed a lineage that shaped not only his sense of belonging, but also the emotional architecture of his childhood. And now, that foundation had shifted beneath him, leaving him teetering on a precipice of shock, grief, and self-exploration. The immediate emotional fallout was profound. Imagine realizing that the man you have always known as your father, whose guidance, expectations, and presence were taken as biological certainty, is not your genetic parent. Every memory is re-examined. Every childhood lesson, every moment of guidance, every nuanced glance now carries a dual meaning. Harry's mind must have raced through scenes of birthday celebrations, private conversations with Charles, moments of bonding and subtle tension, searching for clues that were always there but never recognized. The very act of processing this reality demanded a recalibration of trust, love, and perception. Harry's grief was multifaceted. On one level, it was grief for the loss of a perceived father-son connection that had been framed as biological truth. On another level, it was grief for the secrecy surrounding the revelation, the decades during which he had unknowingly carried questions, uncertainties, and a vague sense of dissonance regarding his own identity. The juxtaposition of love for Charles and the knowledge that Hewitt was his biological father created a psychological paradox. Loyalty conflicted with fact, affection intertwined with shock. The emotional weight was staggering. Compounding the shock was the realization that Diana had carried this secret with her, navigating a world of scrutiny, expectation, and personal turmoil while shielding Harry from the knowledge. Her protection, her maternal love, now appeared both heroic and haunting. On one hand, she had ensured that Harry's upbringing was filled with love, guidance, and security. On the other hand, the secrecy introduced an invisible tension that he had subconsciously absorbed. He must have questioned whether he could have detected the truth earlier, or whether he had sensed the subtle undercurrents that now revealed themselves with devastating clarity. The emotional fallout extended beyond grief into identity formation. Harry had grown up believing he was the son of Charles, inheriting not only titles and legacy, but also the assumptions and expectations associated with the monarchy. Now, those assumptions were fundamentally altered. Questions about heredity, appearance, temperament, and personality became intensely personal. Traits he had assumed were inherited from Charles might, in fact, have origins he had never considered. Every reflection in the mirror, every familial resemblance, every memory from childhood was now reframed through the lens of this revelation. Self-perception was inevitably challenged. Harry had constructed an identity grounded in love, tradition, and continuity. Suddenly, the narrative of his life required reevaluation. He faced questions like, who am I beyond my titles? Beyond the monarchy? Beyond my perceived lineage? How does one reconcile love for a father figure with the reality of a different biological parent? How does one integrate complex, contradictory emotions without fracturing the core of the self? These questions are emotionally and intellectually demanding for anyone, but magnified exponentially under the pressures of public scrutiny and historical significance. The revelation also introduced complicated relational dynamics. Harry's bond with Charles, previously framed by both affection and obligation, faced an unprecedented test. How do you maintain a meaningful connection with someone who raised you as a father but is not your biological parent? How do you honor emotional bonds while reconciling the undeniable truth of genetics? These are questions that touch the very essence of human relationships. For Harry, they were more than abstract. They were urgent, pressing, and unavoidable. Meanwhile, James Hewitt became more than a name whispered in the tabloids. He became a living connection to a truth that had long been hidden. The emotional complexity of connecting with someone who is now confirmed as a biological parent, but with whom there is no childhood bond, is staggering. For Harry, this is not merely about science. It is about emotions, attachment, trust, and the delicate reconstruction of family dynamics. The psychological intricacies are immense. How do you integrate a new parent figure without diminishing the love and respect you hold for the man who raised you? How do you navigate guilt, loyalty, and the public attention that magnifies every action? Anger, too, inevitably surfaced, not necessarily directed at anyone in particular, but at circumstance, secrecy, and fate. Harry may have experienced frustration at the decades of ambiguity, at the whispers that haunted his life, at the complexity of a childhood shaped in part by secrets beyond his control. Yet, this anger likely existed alongside compassion for Diana, for Charles, for Hewitt, as he processed the human decisions, emotional vulnerabilities, and historical pressures that had led to this moment. The emotional fallout was not one-dimensional. It was a tangle of grief, shock, curiosity, love, anger, and reflection. Coping mechanisms would have become critical. Harry, like anyone faced with a seismic emotional revelation, would need time, space, and support to navigate the storm of feelings. Trusted friends, private reflection, and possibly professional guidance would become essential tools in reconstructing an emotional equilibrium. The process of integrating such a revelation is neither swift nor simple. It requires patience, courage, and emotional resilience. Harry's experiences throughout childhood, navigating secrecy, media attention, and relational complexity, may have equipped him with the tools to endure, but the challenge remained profound. The ripple effects extended beyond Harry's personal experience. Every relationship, every memory, and every interaction became subject to reevaluation. Childhood moments with Charles, private exchanges with Diana, even fleeting observations about traits, temperament, and personal inclinations were now reframed. Friends, staff, and confidants, all part of Harry's inner circle, may have been drawn into a complex emotional reality as he sought understanding and clarity. The personal fallout became relational, as the revelation required a recalibration of trust, loyalty, and emotional connections across the board. Emotionally, Harry also had to confront the implications of public scrutiny. Unlike most people navigating personal revelations, his experience could not remain private. The world would inevitably weigh in, forming judgments, speculating motives, and projecting interpretations onto him. The intersection of intensely private emotions with unavoidable public attention magnified the fallout, adding layers of complexity to every thought, feeling, and action. Every step forward would be measured not only by internal emotional reconciliation, but also by the perception of millions worldwide. Despite the chaos, there was potential for growth. The revelation, as devastating as it was, offered Harry an opportunity to understand himself more fully, to reassess family dynamics, and to confront the nuanced legacy of Diana's love and protection. It forced him to navigate a landscape of conflicting emotions with courage, emotional intelligence, and reflection. The fallout was painful, yes, but it also provided clarity, insight, and the chance to redefine what family, identity, and loyalty truly mean in the context of love and history. Harry's confrontation with his identity was not a single moment. It was an ongoing process, a journey through grief, curiosity, understanding, and emotional resilience. The DNA confirmation was both an ending and a beginning, the end of speculation and uncertainty, and the beginning of a profound personal reckoning. Every emotion he experienced, shock, grief, anger, compassion, reflection, became part of a transformative journey that would reshape his understanding of himself, his mother, his father figures, and the broader meaning of family. When a secret of this magnitude emerges, it does not remain confined to private walls. For Prince Harry, the revelation of his true parentage reverberated far beyond his immediate family, sending shockwaves through the palace, the media, and the very people he trusted most. The DNA test that confirmed James Hewitt as his biological father was more than a scientific conclusion. It was a seismic event with social, emotional, and historical ramifications. The world was about to witness a storm, and Harry stood at the eye of it. The first to react were, naturally, those closest to him. Within his inner circle, trusted friends, advisors, and confidants, the news prompted a mix of empathy, shock, and concern. These were individuals who had accompanied Harry through decades of scrutiny, protecting him from tabloids, advising him on personal matters, and helping him navigate the treacherous waters of royal life. Yet even they could not fully cushion the emotional blow. Friends described the moment as surreal, noting how the combination of surprise, grief, and anger created a complex emotional tableau. Harry, known for his courage and resilience, was human, vulnerable, and deeply affected. Within the royal family itself, the revelation created tension, confusion, and quiet anxiety. Prince Charles, confronted with the undeniable truth, had to reconcile a lifetime of parental expectation with the reality of biological divergence. The public would see him as a father figure, yet privately, the knowledge of non-paternity introduced a silent complexity that could not be addressed openly. Relationships with siblings, especially William, were similarly complicated. William, who shared Diana's protection and upbringing, now had to process a truth that redefined family dynamics, creating unspoken questions about loyalty, love, and identity. Every interaction, every glance, every family gathering was now imbued with layers of emotional nuance previously unimagined. The monarchy, acutely aware of public perception, braced for scrutiny. Any revelation involving the royal family is amplified exponentially, but one concerning lineage strikes at the heart of institutional legitimacy. Advisors and strategists began weighing potential fallout, anticipating media frenzy, and assessing the political, social, and emotional consequences. Protocol and tradition, so rigidly maintained in other matters, suddenly felt brittle against the weight of this deeply personal revelation. The palace's challenge was immense: how to protect Harry, manage family dynamics, and navigate an unavoidable global audience eager for scandal and detail. The media's reaction was instantaneous and relentless. Tabloids, news networks, and online forums erupted with speculation, analysis, and sensationalism. Headlines screamed, questions proliferated, and narratives competed for dominance. Some outlets framed the revelation as a betrayal of royal tradition, others as a dramatic twist worthy of a historical novel. Social media amplified the discussion, creating a cacophony of opinion, judgment, and intrigue. For Harry, the public reaction added an additional layer of emotional complexity, Private grief and confusion now existed under the glare of global observation, magnifying every feeling, every decision, every reaction. Within Harry's inner circle, there was a careful balancing act between transparency and discretion. Friends and advisors offered support, guidance, and counsel, emphasizing the need for emotional processing before public discussion. Their role became critical. They had to protect Harry's emotional well-being, manage potential leaks, and help him navigate both the private and public dimensions of the revelation. Their insights were invaluable, providing a buffer against the chaos of public scrutiny while reinforcing the human connections that grounded him amid unprecedented turbulence. The royal household, meanwhile, moved cautiously. Traditional channels of communication, private meetings, secure correspondence, and discreet consultations were employed to contain the emotional fallout and protect the family's cohesion. Advisors debated the best approach to both internal and external communication, mindful that any misstep could inflame media speculation or destabilize relationships. Behind closed doors, the palace was a hive of emotional intensity as staff, officials, and family members navigated the complex interplay of loyalty, discretion, and truth. Public reaction was also shaped by context. The world had long been fascinated by Diana, James Hewitt, and the royal family's private life. Rumors, whispers, and speculation had circulated for decades, creating a cultural expectation for dramatic revelation. The DNA test, by confirming a truth long suspected in private circles, fulfilled this expectation in a way that was both shocking and inevitable. Global audiences were primed for drama, and the release of information sent ripples across continents, prompting discussion, debate, and emotional engagement at levels that few other events could match. Harry's personal response to the public and private reactions was a delicate balancing act. On one hand, he had to process his own emotions, grief, confusion, anger, and curiosity. On the other hand, he had to navigate the reactions of family, advisors, and the world at large. The interplay of these forces created a dynamic that was both emotionally taxing and intellectually complex. Every decision, whether to speak, remain silent, or share selectively, was imbued with consequence, both private and public. Critically, the reactions within the inner circle highlighted the importance of trust, loyalty, and discretion. Friends and advisors became anchors, offering perspective rooted in long-term observation and intimate knowledge of Harry's personality and needs. They reminded him of the love and protection he had received from Diana, of the relationships that remained intact, and of the emotional resilience that had been cultivated through a lifetime of navigating unique pressures. Their guidance allowed him to approach the unfolding situation with measured reflection rather than impulsive reaction, even as emotions ran high. The emotional intensity was compounded by anticipation. How would the broader public interpret the revelation? How would commentators, historians, and royal experts frame it? How would peers, friends, and extended family respond? For Harry, the answer was irrelevant to his immediate processing of the truth, but unavoidable in the sense that public life is inseparable from private reality in the royal context. Every feeling was magnified by the awareness that the world was watching, interpreting, and responding. Interestingly, some of the most profound reactions were subtle and private. Loyal staff, who had been part of Harry's life for decades, quietly observed, supported, and adapted. Their dedication offered Harry a sense of continuity and stability amidst the emotional turbulence. Even as the palace adjusted to the revelation, these unseen figures provided the human connection, reassurance, and trust that helped Harry navigate the psychological complexity of this moment. The juxtaposition of private and public reactions created a constant tension. Harry's personal emotional journey existed in parallel with global fascination. Intimate processing collided with media speculation. Grief was mirrored by sensational headlines. Every interaction became a negotiation between authenticity and performance, between privacy and unavoidable public scrutiny. This duality, private turmoil under global observation, intensified every emotional spike, every moment of reflection, and every decision regarding disclosure or silence. For the monarchy, the situation was equally delicate. Internal cohesion, public perception, and institutional stability were all at stake. Advisors sought to manage the fallout with discretion, sensitivity, and strategic communication. Their challenge was enormous: to protect Harry, maintain family unity, and navigate a global media landscape primed for controversy. Every decision, what to acknowledge, what to withhold, what to control, required careful judgment, foresight, and emotional intelligence. As for Harry, he began to navigate a landscape that was simultaneously intensely personal and globally scrutinized. The reactions around him, friends, family, staff, and media, created a network of pressure, support, and complexity that required emotional resilience and deliberate reflection. He learned, as he always had, that navigating life under extraordinary circumstances demanded awareness, strategy, and the ability to balance private truth with public expectation. And yet, despite all the support, all the guidance, and all the careful navigation, the emotional truth remained his alone. The DNA revelation was his to integrate, his to understand, and his to reconcile with his past, present, and future. It had shaken the palace, captivated the public, and transformed the conversations around royalty.